Most people don't think they're bad. In fact, most people think they're reasonable, fair, logical, even justified. So here's the question. Then why do people hurt each other? Not criminals, not monsters, normal people, people who genuinely believe they're right. Hello, and welcome back to Bookworm. Today we're diving into Evil, a book that explores one of the most uncomfortable truths about human behavior. Because when people act in harmful ways, they usually have a reason, a story, a justification, and from their perspective, it makes sense. That's what makes this dangerous. Because evil doesn't always feel wrong while it's happening. Sometimes it feels completely logical. Stay with me as we dive deeper. Because once you understand this, you'll start seeing conflict very differently. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Today, we're diving into one of the biggest, oldest questions there is, and we're using the incredible work of psychologist Roy F. Baumeister as our guide. We're going to peel back the layers on why people do truly awful things. And what we find, well, it's a lot more complicated and, honestly, a bit more uncomfortably relatable than you might expect. So, let's get right into it.
So this is it, right? The central question. Whether it's a small act of cruelty or a huge historical atrocity, we're all left asking, why? We want a simple answer, a nice, clean line between good and evil. But that line it's just so much blurrier than we like to admit. And here's what Baumeister points out. That question, why? It's almost always asked by the victim. The person who's been hurt is the one desperately searching for a reason. The person who did the hurting, they rarely ask themselves that at all.
And this quote, it perfectly captures what Baumeister calls the myth of pure evil. You know the type we're talking about, right? The villain in the movie, laughing like a maniac, just wanting to cause pain for the fun of it. They're sadistic, they're power-hungry, and most importantly, they are completely different from the rest of us. And you know, it's a really comforting story because it lets us put evil in a neat little box, far, far away from ourselves.
But come on, is reality ever that simple? Of course not. This whole myth of pure evil, as popular as it is, really starts to fall apart when you look closer. And to show us why, Baumeister tells this simple little story that just cuts right to the heart of the matter. It shows how everything, absolutely everything, depends on your perspective.
Okay, so picture this. A woman's rushing to catch a flight. She buys a bag of chips, and the only seat she can find is at this little table with a guy who's just reading his newspaper. So she sits down, opens her chips, and then something completely unbelievable happens. The man lowers his paper, looks at her, reaches into her bag of chips, pulls one out, and just eats it. Doesn't say a word. I mean, can you imagine? She is just stunned. She's outraged. This is a total breakdown of society, right? Her mind is racing, trying to figure this guy out. He's a monster, a creep, some kind of aggressive weirdo. So she decides she's got to send a message. She stares him down and defiantly takes a chip for herself. And what does he do? He takes another one. They get into this bizarre, silent chip war, back and forth, until the bag is totally empty. In her mind, this guy is the face of some strange, motiveless evil. And then comes the twist. She gets to her gate, she's digging in her carry-on for her ticket, and she finds it, her own bag of chips, completely sealed and unopened. They had been eating his chips the entire time. And in that one instant, everything flips. She was the rude one. She was the aggressor. And that man she saw as a villain, he was probably looking at her, thinking the exact same thing. And that story just nails the core idea of Baumeister's work. Our perception of an act as evil depends almost entirely on where we're standing. From the woman's point of view, the man's actions were just malicious and bizarre. But from his point of view, her actions were just as weird. The key takeaway here is that evil isn't really an identity. It's a label that the victim applies to the perpetrator. The person doing the harm almost never sees themselves that way. Okay, so this brings us to a really fundamental shift we have to make. To truly get a handle on why harmful things happen, we have to do something that feels a little uncomfortable. We've got to put the victim's perspective on hold just for a moment and try to see the world through the perpetrator's eyes. Now, this is not about excusing what they did. Not at all. It's about understanding the mindset that led to it. And here's the absolute key. The people who do harmful things, from the kid in the schoolyard to a full-blown terrorist, they almost always believe they are in the right. They build a story for themselves, a narrative where what they did wasn't just logical, it was necessary. They see themselves as the real victims, striking back against a wrong, or as heroes fighting for some noble cause. In their own story, they are the good guys. Now, this leads us to a huge concept called the magnitude gap. It's all about the massive difference in how an event is experienced by the two people involved. The person doing the harm, they tend to downplay it. They remember it as a minor thing, a justified response to something the other person did first. To them, it's just a footnote in their day. But for the victim, that same event is a major trauma, an unprovoked attack that leaves a lasting scar. This isn't just a simple disagreement. It's like they're living in two totally different realities. And that gap, that's the fuel that makes the engine of revenge run. So if it's not just a simple love of being cruel, what's actually motivating all this? Well, Baumeister argues that most violence isn't as random as it seems. You can usually trace it back to one of four main roots. These are the psychological drivers that can lead to really harmful actions if they're not kept in check. Okay, here they are. First, you've got instrumental violence. This one's pretty simple. It's pragmatic. Violence is just a tool to get what you want, like money from a robbery. Second, and this one is a huge one, is threatened egotism. This is all about revenge, defending a high and often pretty fragile sense of self-worth against an insult. Third, there's idealism. This is when people do awful things because they truly believe they're fighting for a good cause, making the world a better place by getting rid of their enemies. And finally, you have sadism, getting actual pleasure from hurting people. And while this is what we think of when we imagine evil, the research shows that real sadism is actually pretty rare compared to the other three. Let's really drill down on that second one, threatened egotism, because it completely demolishes a myth we've all heard a million times. We're always told that bullies and violent people secretly have low self-esteem, right? Well, the evidence actually points in the exact opposite direction. From playground bullies all the way up to dictators, people who commit violence tend to have really inflated, high opinions of themselves. And violence is what happens when that big ego gets challenged. It's not about feeling worthless, it's about lashing out when someone doesn't give you the respect you think you deserve.
So, what happens when you take these motivations, especially that threatened ego, and you combine it with the magnitude gap we just talked about? Well, you get a really dangerous feedback loop. You get what's called an escalation spiral, where a tiny little disagreement can just explode into serious violence.
This slide lays out the mechanics perfectly. So let's say person A insults person B. Because of that magnitude gap, B doesn't see it as a small comment. They feel it as a major unfair attack. So B retaliates with what feels to them like a totally fair response. But to person A, who probably already forgot the initial insult, this retaliation feels like a huge, unprovoked attack that came out of nowhere. So now person A feels like the innocent victim, and they strike back even harder. And you can see where this is going. The cycle just keeps going, getting worse and worse, with each side feeling more and more justified. And this is the really tragic result of that spiral. You end up with two people, or two groups, or even two countries, who are both 100% convinced that they are the good guys. Both see themselves as the noble victims, heroically fighting back against an enemy that is just evil, irrational, and aggressive. They're locked in this conflict that, from the outside, looks like a totally pointless cycle of revenge. But from the inside, for them, it feels like a moral crusade. Now, I know this all might be sounding a little bit bleak, but the whole point of this analysis isn't to make us cynical. It's actually meant to be incredibly practical, because understanding these psychological mechanics is the first and most important step towards stopping them from happening in the first place. Let's be absolutely crystal clear about this. Understanding a perpetrator's mindset is not the same as forgiving or condoning what they did. The goal here is causal understanding, not moral judgment. Think of it like a doctor studying a disease. You have to understand exactly how it works if you're ever going to have a hope of curing it. Recognizing the signs, the threatened ego, the start of an escalation spiral, in others and even in ourselves, that gives us the power to step in and hit the brakes. After looking at all these reasons for violence, greed, ego, idealism, you might be wondering, why isn't there more evil in the world? The answer comes down to one thing: self-control. Most of the time, our own internal brakes, our inhibitions, they hold our aggressive impulses in check. Harmful acts happen when that self-control breaks down, maybe because of stress, or alcohol, or a culture that encourages it. So strengthening this internal barrier, that's our best defense. And this brings us to what might be the most challenging, but also the most important takeaway from all of this. As long as we think of evildoers as some kind of different species, as monsters who are fundamentally not like us, we can never really solve the problem. The hardest step, but the most necessary one, is to recognize that these psychological patterns, defending our ego, getting caught in revenge cycles, they exist in all of us.
So we'll leave you with that question. Now that you have this framework, where do you see these dynamics playing out? Is it in an argument you see on social media? Is it in office politics? Is it in how countries talk about each other on the news? The magnitude gap, threatened egotism, the escalation spiral, these aren't just concepts in a book. They're the hidden grammar of human conflict, big and small. And understanding that grammar is our best hope for writing a better story.
If there's one idea to take from this book, it's this. People don't hurt others because they think they're evil. They hurt others because they think they're right. Evil shows that most harmful actions come from justification. Revenge feels fair, anger feels deserved, punishment feels necessary, and from the inside, it all makes sense. That's the uncomfortable part because it means conflict isn't just about bad people, it's about perspective. Two people, two stories, both convinced they're right, and that's how things escalate. But once you understand this, you gain something powerful: awareness, the ability to pause, to question, to stop before things go too far. If this made you think differently, like the video, subscribe to Bookworm and stay aware. Because sometimes being completely sure you're right is the most dangerous thing